Going Crow. Hello, welcome back to another episode with me, Merit. How is everybody? It's been a long week with Oppenheimer. What do you guys think of the movie? For me, it was such a great experience. I would never doubted Christopher Nolan's movie. He's such a great director. Especially that movie was fantastic. Oppenheimer's rises from the ashes, telling us his story, and I am grateful for his story to be able to see light again, cause we need to talk about it.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The story of Robert Oppenheimer is as timely as today's news and as timeless as a Greek tragedy. He was a brilliant scientist who devoted his talents to serve of his country. He was celebrated for making the atomic bomb and vilified for not wanting to make the hydrogen bomb. He helped unlock the secret of the atom for his country, and in the end, his government would not trust him with those secrets. His contributions to the Manhattan Project and to Los Alamos are legendary. He came up with the idea of Central Weapons Laboratory, and he picked the site for it here at Los Alamos, although there were many brilliant scientists and engineers who made enormous contributions to the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer's contribution was so unique. He left Los Alamos and the Manhattan Project once the height was scaled. He continued to help find the way through the new country. He felt a deep responsibility for his work on the Manhattan Project and thought it was his duty to continue to make his technical experience and judgment available to the government. For 9 years after the war ended, the government drew heavily upon his talents. He served faithfully on numerous defense and nuclear policy committees. He chaired the General Advisory Committee to the Atomic Energy Commission. Under his leadership, the General Advisory Committee promoted the development of this laboratory, the production and perfection of the atomic weapons, and the development of nuclear reactor for submarines and naval propulsion. Yet Oppenheimer's prestige came crashing down. That led President Eisenhower to call for a blank wall to be placed between Dr. Oppenheimer and any secret data pending a security hearing in 1954. They counted him as a traitor. When the Soviet Union conducted its first successful nuclear test, this was well ahead of the schedule of most American projections, which suggested at the earliest, with General Groves claiming that the Soviet would not have the bomb until the 60s or 70s. Well, never underestimate your enemy, General Groves. American officials became concerned with finding a way to renew American nuclear supremacy. They became increasingly interested in Edward Teller's work on the super or the hydrogen bomb. While the atomic bombs built during the Manhattan Project used the principle of nuclear fission, the hydrogen bomb was based upon nuclear fusion. While fission is most easily achieved with heavy elements such as uranium or plutonium, fusion easiest with light elements. The priority at Los Alamos Laboratory, however, went to fission bomb, not the super. After the war, Teller continued to pursue the idea of the hydrogen bomb, until the secret of the atomic bomb was in the hand of their enemy, the Soviets. Oppenheimer, by contrast, pushed back against the development of strategic fusion weapons, preferring that America increase its stock of technical fission weapons. He believed that the hydrogen, according to him, a weapon of mass genocide. His combative nature and caustic tongue made him no friends and several enemies, including Louis Strauss. Oppenheimer had several years earlier humiliated Strauss at the congressional hearing about whether or not to ban the sale of radioisotopes. Unfortunately, it was Strauss whom Oppenheimer was fighting against in the fight over America's future nuclear policy. This refusal made Oppenheimer fueled their suspicions of his loyalty. In November of 1953, William Borden sent a letter to Edgar Hoover, a director of the FBI. Borden had spent several months inquiring after the FBI's investigation into Oppenheimer's background, and he had compiled lists of evidence which he thought would suggest that Oppenheimer was more likely than not a Soviet spy. Borden had been a close confidant of Strauss, who had more than likely encouraged Borden's investigation. The Atomic Energy Commission ordered a security proceeding against him. Louis Strauss informed Oppenheimer that his security clearance had been suspended following a review of his file, and suggested that he resign. Oppenheimer refused, instead demanding a hearing be held. Obie's hired well-known lawyer, Garrison. Okay, don't panic. Opie faced 24 charges, while 23 of them had to do with his communist associations. The last charge was concerned with his alleged misconduct concerning the hydrogen bomb, altering estimate of the bomb's feasibility, opposing its development, and declining to cooperate even when Truman granted the hydrogen bomb project a go-ahead. Obie's friend Joseph Loeb later described the hearing as like a hearing on your wife after you've been married 20 years. Undoubtedly, Oppenheimer had friends and relatives who were communists, starting with his young love interest in the 30s, Jane Tattelberg, a sporadic member of the American Communist Party. Around the time when he began to work at University of California, Berkeley, his social circle grew to contain a number of either American Communist Party and those who sympathized with communism, but were not themselves members. This included his brother, Frank Oppenheimer, who joined the Communist Party in the late 1937. Also, his wife Catherine was a former member. Oppenheimer was likely sympathetic to the communist cause. It's unclear whether or not he ever joined. While all his communist sympathetic were considered cause for alarm, they did not stop him from being hired on the Manhattan Project. When General Leslie Groves was first considering Oppenheimer for the job, he insisted that he be granted clearance regardless of his communist past. It's crazy, after the army cleared him in 1943 and by the Atomic Energy Commission when it cleared him in 1947, they became the basics of new allegations in December 1953. This literally a scheme. They opened the file again to create unfair allegations. The Commission's decision was driven by a desire among its political leaderships to discredit Oppenheimer in the public debates over nuclear weapon policy. It was unclear to the defense by which rules the court was playing, whether a hearing being held or a trial. The defense suffered from a lack of access. None of Oppenheimer's defense team had security clearance, and therefore they could not see pivotal documents, including information from Oppenheimer's FBI file and some of his own writings. It really felt like a criminal trial. Albert Einstein argued that Oppenheimer had no obligation to subject himself to the witch hunt, that he had served his country well, and if this was the reward that America offered, he should turn his back on her. I believe some have their own perspective for dealing with such situations. Here we see Einstein's position and what he would have done if he was in Obi's place. But Obi saying he could not turn his back on America. He loved America. Sadly, at the end of the hearing, as we know, Oppenheimer's clearance was revoked by 2-1 vote of the panel, but also concluded that he was a loyal citizen. We all can agree that their decision followed a manifestly unjust and unethical hearing that would be resoundingly condemned today. There is this question that kept knocking in my head. Was Obi a war criminal? Well, he wasn't tried at a war crime trials because he wasn't accused of any war crimes, but really does he count as a criminal for the bomb? Being hired by the country to work on a project for them so they can use your knowledge and your searching for their advantage of making a weapon that can destroy humanity, doesn't that really what the definition of an assassin? He's not fully responsible for what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Among the reasons, he made no decisions at the use of the nuclear bomb he developed, not deployed. Harry Truman was the one who dropped the pair of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and ended the war. Following the events, the US framed its decision as an unfortunate but necessarily act for the greater good. The main function of such stories is to justify a terrible war crime. The only reason why President Truman and the pilots who dropped the bombs were not prosecuted as war criminals is because the United States ended up winning the war. The bombing is just a lack of humanity. By making a justification, we're led to pretend that the perspective of the victims did not exist at all, which is morally and spiritually wrong. What is one extra innocent life if you were prepared to kill tens of thousands for the greater good? After all, killing a person to get the codes has all the elements that make a brutal murder prohibited and punishable. The bomb transmutates matter into energy. It burns as the sun burns. It turns people into lights. It turns their city into radio ash beds. It disintegrates the ordinary miracles of the Diana world and sentence life in a million beautiful versions. Every moving, shuddering birth, every egg baby, everything that walks, gallops, flies, hopes, swims, or opens in the morning, every pulse in the organic earth body is forever still. Life is profoundly and eternally humiliated. All music dies in the throat. All cities of ecstasy, all literacy. The things we meant to say, and all this called nuclear capability. What do we do about this monster we've created? When we think about the bomb and what happened in Japan, I think we must be grateful for Klaus Fuchs and Theodore Hall for leaking the atomic bomb to the Soviet, even though they betrayed their allies, but also for the greater good. If one country had the atomic bomb, imagine how terrifying must have been to the rest of the world. As we know, authoritarians seek to impose control over people's behavior and mind. They use gaslighting, brainwashing, fear-mongering, and intimidation to coerce subjects into obedience. They are often good at sensing and channeling collective anger, fear, and resentment. Often fragmented, inconsistent, and internally conflicted, they foster chaos and divisiveness in society. Fears and threats are quickly forgotten and replaced with political myths, such as popular myths of dictator. Another common myth, that of the Golden Age, referred to a promise to reclaim the long-lost glory and make the nation great again. In history, such a pledge has never worked, as it's impossible to reverse time. In the past, many dictators used similar slogans which always resulted in self-destruction, but not before many others' lives were destroyed. Such leaders often position themselves as a savior who can bring justice and protection from the hostile and threatening world. Often we fail to recognize early enough the tectonic shifts in the collaborative psyche as we slide into the self-serving and encapsulated alternative reality. Gaining and maintaining power such as the atomic bomb, it would be more powerful than Hitler. I really like how Klaus and Theodore Hall shape-shift this horrifying reality into the dimension we live in today. The term mutual assured destruction really saved our planet by distributing weapons in the world. The world would become peaceful as we see the atomic bomb turn from a scary secret to balance between the great powers. And maybe this is why we didn't see the atomic bomb in wars like Korea and Vietnam. Since the first and only use of nuclear weapons in 1945, the international community has wrestled with the issue of how the law of war applies to such weapons. For decades, the discourse about nuclear weapons was focused on their military and security aspects and concern about their proliferation. Increasingly, however, the debate is expanding to include a focus on their international humanitarian law, as well as their catastrophic humanitarian consequences. While a number of international agreements to limit the development and proliferation of nuclear weapons were already in place, these weapons were only internationally prohibited in 2017 when the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted. Don't worry people, we're safe.